Today's video will give you some instruction on how to live yourself into a new emotional perspective. People who play Grow a Greater You uh, involve themselves into an intentional belief raising protocol. And the protocol works beautifully because it works in perfect concert with how our subconscious brain works, how we can build new beliefs working with our subconscious brain. And of course, if you've read my books, you know that the reason why we do this is because the quantum field reflects our beliefs back to us in the form of our material experiences. So that once we have our beliefs aligned with our desires, we've really done all the heavy lifting we need to do. The quantum field truly takes care of the rest for us. Not that we'll never do action, but the quantum field will be supplying us with inspired actions, inspirations. It'll also be reflecting back to us possibilities and potential that we literally could not see from our previous perspective, from our previous limiting beliefs. So when we play Grow a Greater You with the areas of our life where we experience suffering, we're going to get honest with ourselves about where we really are, what we truly believe. And we do that by writing about how we truly feel about our absent desire and then finding where we are on the emotional reference chart that you can find on my website and is also in my books. I do have another video about how to start with the emotional reference chart, how to find yourself. But now this video is about how to live your way into a new emotional perspective. Because what we do a day at a time, or over the course of a few days, we write about our absent desire from the perspective of the next highest emotion on the emotional reference chart. We write about it in the present tense. We write about how that desire will look, feel, taste, smell, manifest in our lives as a material reflection from the perspective of that new, slightly improved emotional state. So how, and then once we've done that writing, we live our way into that next highest emotional perspective. And in so doing, we live our way into slightly higher, slightly more aligned beliefs. So how do we do that? How do we live our way into a new emotional perspective? And actually, it's not as complicated as it might sound. And I will say this, from the perspective of the next highest emotional state, you've already written about it. Let's say that, let's for example, say that the next highest emotional state is worry. Okay, and let's say hypothetically the desire that I'm working this process on is money. I don't make it my task to worry, to view everything through the emotional perspective of worry, just money, just finances. So when I see advertisements for products or services that I would love but can't afford, when I have a bill arrive in the mail, when my paycheck arrives, when I see my Quicken account on my computer, when I'm thinking about money, anytime money comes into my conscious awareness in one form or another, I want to make sure that I'm seeing it through the perspective of worry, which means that I want to tell myself stories about that experience with money from the perspective of worry. Now remember, you've already written about money from the perspective of worry, so you have a reservoir of ideas and energy from which to draw. But you want to craft the stories you tell yourself about any experience with money from the perspective of worry, if that's the emotional perspective that you're currently on. And remember, as you know from my books, when I talk about telling stories, I'm talking about the meaning and value you assign to your material experiences. You want to keep your stories believable and also make them as best feeling as is appropriate. or as best feeling as you can. So when you tell yourself stories about money from the perspective of worry, you want to acknowledge that worry is where you are. Let's say I get a bill in the mail and it's higher than I want it to be, and that's displeasing. I want to tell myself a story about that bill and make sure that it's from the perspective of worry. I might say, wow, this bill is very displeasing. I wish I didn't have to pay it. I don't like that I have to pay it. I'm worried that this is just another sign from the universe that I'm never going to be financially abundant. I'm never going to have all the money I need. I'm always going to be in debt. Yeah, I'm worried about that. And yet, I also want to acknowledge that I'm in a process to believably and gently raise my beliefs. And I know that this won't be my perspective forever. But for right now, today, it is. Now, that does take effort to consciously and intentionally choose a story to tell like that. But it's a worthwhile investment. And what you want to watch for is you will be tempted to tell stories from much lower perspectives, like, oh, I feel hopeless because I got this bill. Gently stop that story and gently remind yourself that you are choosing today to tell stories from the perspective of worry, and nudge your story up into worry and out of that lower emotional perspective. Remind your subconscious brain that it's okay for you to be doing this. It's believable. It's not much more improved than your previous perspective. It's okay for you to be telling your stories from the perspective of worry. And alternatively, you may be tempted sometimes to tell stories from a higher perspective. Maybe you get an unexpected influx of money, or you find a $20 bill on the ground and you want to jump straight up to joy. It's perfectly okay to feel good about things, certainly about anything else other than money, especially during this time. So you want to tell a believable, better feeling story about money by ratcheting your story back down gently. You may say something like, although finding this $20 bill fills me with joy and elation, and I'm very happy about that, I'm also going to remember that today I am consciously choosing to see money through the emotional perspective of worry, and remind myself that this is the perspective that I wish to hold and encourage. And remind myself also that I'm doing this for very good reasons, because I want to fully live my way into the perspective of worry so that I can continue on up the chart. So yeah, there's a good reason for me to pull and reel myself back in. What I will say to you is this: there are two really good signs that tell you that you are successful in having lived your way into seeing your desire from the new emotional perspective. The first one is when it becomes much more natural, much more second nature to tell stories from that perspective. You don't have to quote unquote force yourself so much to reel your stories in or nudge them back up to that perspective. So when that's happening more naturally, that's a very good sign that you've lived your way into that new emotional perspective. And the second sign is when you notice that your reflections from the quantum field regarding that desire, when the information you're getting regarding that desire in the reflections you experience, in your material experiences, match up with that emotional perspective, then you also know that's your other red light indicator that you have lived your way into that new emotional perspective. Keep in mind, if you haven't done this process yet, or if you're just beginning, these instructions will make perfect sense both to you consciously and to your subconscious brain, because each nudge up the emotional perspective, the emotional reference chart, is minor. It's very gradual. It is a slight improvement, not grandiose, not a quantum leap, and that's intentional, because doing it in this slight, gradual manner is believable. It almost tricks your subconscious brain into accepting the changes. It's like putting a vitamin inside a donut and feeding it to yourself. Your subconscious brain will go right along with you because of the believability of these slight improvements. And before you know it, you'll be much higher up the chart than where you started. And the good news is, I want to remind you that with every tick up the chart, even the slight one perspective movement, your reflections will change. They will improve. They'll be slightly more aligned with your ultimate desires for that particular topic. That's because you truly will be holding slightly more improved beliefs with each tick up the scale. And the quantum field can do nothing other than reflect your beliefs back to you. So congratulations. Although you're not ultimately where you want to be and where you will be, know that you are already actively involved in a real, reliable process, and you are already actively creating a more pleasing, more aligned material reality by changing your beliefs and thus changing the reflections the quantum field provides to you. Thanks. I'm glad you joined me.